The initial success of the International Space Station encouraged those in government, industry and academia to accelerate their efforts into discovering ways of permanently returning to the Moon and exploring Mars. Inflated modules protected by lunar soil and linked together to form an expandable base were under study. To explore Mars, engineers began looking into robotic rovers that could serve as pathfinders for manned missions. In this scenario, a Mars spaceship is assembled in space using a robot arm. Heavy launch vehicles haul up its major components. Once the ship was complete, the plan envisaged that a shuttle would bring in the flight crew and the journey would begin. Upon reaching the planet, a crew-carrying lander would separate from the mothership. Guided by information from an earlier rover mission, it would be steered to a pre-planned touchdown spot, providing a base for Mars operations. The International Space Station initiated a period of intense activity by many of the world's brightest young scientists as they pursued early avenues that might allow the implementation of a lunar base and a journey to Mars. It was a comprehensive plan to extend human presence in space. In the 18 months between March 1965 and November 1966, 10 manned missions were launched from Cape Kennedy. "16 astronauts journeyed to the spacecraft on Launch Pad 19. Together, these men helped thrust the United States into an era of exploration. Gemini was a single concept with a number of assignments. It was, in a sense, one launch, one flight, one recovery. Space is infinite. It yields slowly to exploration. In their journey into this environment, the Gemini astronauts logged more than 1,940 man-hours of flight. Hurtling through space at 5 miles per second, they circled the Earth 600 times. In their 40 Earth days in space, they witnessed, as few men have, hundreds of beautiful sunsets on the changing horizons of our planet. Sweeping over continents in a matter of minutes, they gained a new perspective of Earth. For Gemini, equipment and techniques were developed that enabled astronauts for the first time to maneuver their spacecraft, to change their orbit, and to accelerate to new heights. In 1990, the shuttle Discovery launched Hubble's Space Telescope, the most powerful observatory ever built. Able to image detail up to 15 billion miles away, Hubble has provided astronomers with a clear window to our universe. Soon after Hubble was deployed, scientists discovered an aberration in the 94-inch primary mirror. Even so, the huge spaceborne telescope has been returning a steady stream of new information, particularly with the aid of computer enhancement. Similar processing has been used on data from other spacecraft like Voyager, which travelled past the planets. Enhancement now brings out more detail for Hubble scientists. This is the telescope's original image of a galaxy 52 million light-years from Earth, as it's cleaned up to its final version. Here, light pulses in a straight line between Earth and a distant quasar. Years ago, Albert Einstein suggested that if a uniform object crossed the path, light would bend into a ring. But if the object were not uniform, the ring would break up into 4 patches. Known as the Einstein cross, Hubble reconfirmed this part of Einstein's theory of relativity. Hubble also showed scientists a celestial X marking the exact spot of a black hole with the possible mass of 1 million of our suns. Astronauts were already training to fix the Hubble mirror problem in late 1993. By substituting a special component in the telescope, the aberration was repaired. Called CoStar, this corrective optics package contains a series of mirrors that work like contact lenses to restore Hubble close to its full imaging potential. In a clean room at NASA's Goddard Space Flight Center, technicians also practice removing the spacecraft's star tracker, which helps point the telescope. In the meantime, Hubble continues to send back fine detail of the planets, faraway galaxies, black holes, and distant stars, rewriting the textbooks on how we view our universe. It's long been known that processing metal alloys, electronic crystals, and organic materials in the absence of gravity can result in stronger, purer, more uniform products. Now that technology is being applied to the processing of biological materials in microgravity. Protein crystals are being grown in space because only there do they result in large, whole, perfectly shaped materials. These crystals are being used to advance the research efforts that could help us finally understand why tumours spread and what designer drugs can be manufactured to block them. The bioreactor is a new ground-based 3D tissue growth chamber that provides mechanical superiority over earlier models by partially simulating the microgravity of space here on Earth. The end product is higher fidelity tissue that better represents the structure and function of the original tissue. Pacemakers, remote patient monitoring systems, CAT scans, MRIs, biotelemetry and bioreactors, all an unequivocal result of NASA's spaceflight efforts. And yet, they were never the original goal. In the heart of England, young students are reaching for the stars. They are learning that the planets do make the stars wobble. To prove it, a practical demonstration. Then it's into the lecture theatre for a look at the sun and calculations to show that it is rotating every 25 days. Another group of the 70 students have been building robots. Now they are on Mars and trying to capture a Martian. Instructions are shouted to the controller, who has his back to the tabletop. It's fun and builds a rapport among the youngsters. In another room, they're building rockets. It's a 2-hour hands-on session, and at the end of the week, they'll launch and recover them, complete with landing craft. Finally, a demonstration of the awesome power of the model motor. Who needs a holiday when there's space school? The main aim of this particular mission was for Endeavour to rendezvous with the International Space Station and continue the construction of it. The astronauts were to spend 7 days docked to the ISS, delivering, assembling and operate the US-supplied electrical power system on board the station. This included the delivery of the solar arrays and batteries, as well as radiators to provide cooling. These will be the first of a total of 8 sets of solar arrays that, once completed, will comprise the station's electrical power system, converting sunlight to electricity. Using the shuttle's robot arm, Canadian astronaut Marc Garneau moved the solar array into position above the truss structure and drove it home to its installation point. They then secured bolts on each of the 4 corners of the array assembly before Garneau released it from the arm. Pilot Mike Bloomfield took over arm operations and moved Noriega around the array as he connected the power, command and data cables. These pictures came from a camera attached to Noriega's helmet. The spacewalker was working some 50 feet above the cargo bay of the Endeavour, which itself was about 235 miles above Russia at this time. Next, they released the 2 solar array blanket boxes. They had been mounted on the blanket, enabling them to be folded like an accordion for delivery. But the initial computer commands to release the pins holding the blanket boxes closed were not successful. The commands were repeated and the pins on the starboard blanket boxes released. But one pin on the port side blanket box remained in the closed position. It was decided to proceed with the deployment of the starboard solar wing, and the International Space Station slowly unfurled the first half of the solar array. The structure housing the arrays and associated electronics was matted to the station's truss structure about an hour into the spacewalk. Flight controllers decided it was not necessary to attempt to deploy the port wing to allow time to ascertain whether the solar wing that was deployed was properly tensioned. After tests were carried out, it was discovered that the wing was indeed functioning well and sending electrical power to the structure's systems. The spacewalk lasted for 7 hours and 33 minutes. Several days later, the second solar panel was deployed, but in a much slower and more deliberate manner, taking almost 2 hours. By contrast, the other solar wing, the starboard wing, was deployed non-stop in about 13 minutes. Deployment of the port wing was delayed while ground controllers studied a possible problem in one of 2 blankets that made up the starboard structure. They believed the 2 tensioning cables had jumped off their guides during deployment. Despite that, the starboard array was functioning well and producing electricity for the space station. The deployment was scheduled to begin with Endeavour and the space station in daylight, and with television coverage available so that the experts could watch deployment from mission control. The deployment was slow with stops and starts. But it's important because it will eventually supply power to the station, enabling it to conduct basic and applied research in its microgravity environment. As objectives in space become more ambitious, new needs will emerge for realistic training environments. One approach to these needs is already being addressed with software technology known widely as virtual reality. In a virtual environment, the user becomes an active participant in a world of computer-generated images simply by donning a special helmet and specially wired glove. What the user sees and hears is then replaced by computer-generated images, sounds, and mechanical feedback. In a virtual environment, there are no boundaries of time, distance, or the laws of physics. This use of virtual reality makes the work in space more productive and safer. The sophisticated virtual reality software can put you outside of space station freedom, or let you retrieve food from a computer-generated refrigerator, or allow you to perform an important task in low Earth orbit. The nuclear powerhouse that is the Sun is constantly shooting streams of electrically charged particles into space. When this solar wind crashes into the Earth's magnetic field, the magnetosphere, it can break through, damaging orbiting communication satellites and affecting the weather. It's possible to see these solar particles as the aurora borealis, the shimmering lights in the sky near the Earth's magnetic poles. Interest was high as the 4 satellites of the cluster mission began beaming back data from this cosmic battle zone hundreds of kilometers above our heads. The most exciting thing was that with the early data, scientists were able to confirm some of the theories they had, but they were also able to see phenomena which hadn't been expected, things that were different from what the theory said they should be. The cluster mission was extended when China announced its first joint venture in space exploration with the European Space Agency. When they were launched at the end of 2002, China's double-star satellites took over some of the experiments currently running on cluster. ESA says China will not be using the joint mission for military purposes and points out that 2 Chinese rockets will now be used for launching satellites rather than to any aggressive end. Here we see the Great Lakes and the lights of Houston at night. In space, you're able to float to the window and see several countries pass beneath you at the same time. From Italy all the way to Turkey. Space crews are privileged to be able to see phenomena that very few people will ever see. The Southern Lights, or Aurora Australis over the continent of Antarctica. At the end of mission STS-96, the crew deployed a small educational satellite named Starshine. Made of about 900 little mirrors, Starshine's mirrors catch the sunlight and reflect them back on Earth, allowing students to track it and calculate orbital parameters on the ground. Starshine allows students from all over the world to define for themselves what a moving satellite is all about. Once Starshine had been deployed, it was time to get the orbiter ready to come back and fly in the atmosphere, so the crew had to check the reaction control jets and also had to get everything stowed inside Discovery. During re-entry, the view out the window is phenomenal. The hot flashing lights of re-entry illuminate the flight deck and the astronauts. The G-force inside the shuttle starts to increase. Here, it is at about G2. The colours out the windows are spectacular as they change from pink to orange and yellow as the crew falls back to Earth. The shuttle makes its approach to the runway for a nighttime landing and is tracked by infrared cameras. As Discovery approaches the runway, You can see the nose cone still glowing from the heat it has absorbed during re-entry. The landing gear is dropped once the shuttle is about 300 feet from the ground, and pilot Rick Husband shallows out the descent to come in and touch down at about 200 knots. It's a smooth landing as Discovery deploys a drag chute to assist in slowing down the landing. The pilot lines up the centerline runway lights. He jettisons the drag chute and, using the wheel brakes, brings Discovery to a complete stop. A protective paint used on the Statue of Liberty. A tiny laser that unclogs arteries. And for the disabled, a vehicle control system like the lunar rovers. These are just a few of many products with their roots in space technology. This eye-testing device, in use at a KinderCare learning center, has been developed by medical scientists in Alabama. Called the Ocular Screening System, it is based on technology used by NASA's Marshall Space Flight Center in Alabama to analyze pictures like this one of the Sun, which was taken during Skylab missions in the early 1970s. Ocular screening provides a simple, reliable way to detect eye problems in young children, problems which could be incurable if not treated early. The pictures produced by the system look like this. A totally red eye is healthy. White crescents or other variations indicate problems. 8 to 10% of the children tested so far have been found to have serious eye diseases or abnormalities. The children say that the testing is just like having your picture taken. NASA technology is making an impact in another area as well. More accurately, it's absorbing impact in a new line of running shoes. Popularity with running continues to grow, and the constant pounding can be brutal on the legs and feet. To help soften the blow, the Kangaroo Shoe Company has developed a running shoe that incorporates a NASA material, like one used in moonwalking astronaut boots. Called Dynacoil, this springy fibrous material is filled with polyurethane and placed in the midsole of the shoes. Dynacoil not only absorbs shock very well, but also helps control side-to-side movement. The high-speed video system used in the labs helps illustrate the point. When we run, our feet don't just hit the ground and bounce straight back up. They hit, roll over from outside to in, then come back up again. This is called pronation. If a foot over-pronates, injury can occur, and until now, no shoe had ever controlled this motion so well. NASA and industry, bringing space technology down to Earth. '66, 10 manned missions were launched from Cape Kennedy. 16 astronauts journeyed to the spacecraft on Launch Pad 19. Together, these men helped thrust the United States into an era of exploration. Gemini was a single concept with a number of assignments. It was, in a sense, one launch, one flight, one recovery. Space is infinite. It yields slowly to exploration.